All right, so good morning.
Good morning.
How's the show going for everybody?
Great.
Good? Good? All right. Who needs an introduction? Do I need to introduce myself again? Yes? No? Who wasn't here yesterday? All right. Oh, you. You weren't here yesterday. My name's Stan, and you are? No, I'm sorry. Just a little quick background on myself. I'm a wildlife biologist. I have a degree from the University of Minnesota. I have a long history of wildlife stuff. I'm the director of a nature center. I've been doing that for 33 years. And so environmental education is what I do. And that kind of, as I'm a naturalist, and as a naturalist, you're really an educator about everything around us, whether it be the plants or birds or rocks or weather or whatever it may be. And so that education comes forth in a lot of different ways. I write a syndicated newspaper column. I have a syndicated radio show. I write books. My first book came out about 35 years ago, and since then I've written about 200 books, 210, something like that. I can't remember anymore. And what else? I do photo tours. I'm a trip leader, and I one time sat down and counted up. I have 9 different revenue streams in order to make one living. It is not easy anymore. And I'm a wildlife photographer. Hopefully you guys have been watching some of the pictures there too. So today we're going to talk about hummingbirds. You guys ready? You want any questions before we get started? No? Hummingbirds. All right, I got to update that. That's the wrong cover. Okay. So I'm approaching my 40th year, so I have to update this too here. More than 30 years of photographing and studying these miniature marvels. I am oftentimes asked, what is your favorite bird? And it's like, asking what's your favorite child. It just doesn't really go that way. But if I had to break it down to a favorite group of birds, and it certainly would be the hummingbirds. And you're going to see why in just a few minutes. These are such unique critters that they're almost mind-blowing in how cool that they are. So they're tiny size, they're giant personalities, and their amazing colors and mind-boggling ability of flight is really, just the surface of how cool these guys are. So hummingbird family, more than 325 species. That's the second largest family behind the flycatchers. I mean, that itself alone is like pretty amazing that they are so big. And most importantly, they're found here in the New World only. So they're not found in Africa, Asia, Europe. They don't have hummingbirds. Hummingbirds are unique to the Americas. And that's kind of interesting, especially when we look at the fact that, we're going to look at some fossilized hummingbird stuff, and you're going to see something interesting there. Who cares about subfamilies? Let's move on. And so these birds are most easily recognized by their sparkly feathers, their ability to feed on nectar. They're fast, agile flyers. They're the only bird to truly hover. Okay, so other birds hover, but not truly hover. So can you think of another bird that hovers? American kestrel comes to mind for me, the falcons, but they're always turning into the wind and just flying at the same speed that the wind is blowing at them, so they stay stationary. That's not truly hovering. These guys can hover without any headwind at all. So the only bird, or they fly backwards, straight up and down, sideways, do flip-flops and somersaults and everything like that. So some birds have misleading names, like, you guys know what my pet peeve bad name is? Red-winged blackbird, because if you ever look at their wings are black. It's a red-shouldered black-winged blackbird, It doesn't make any sense to me, but anyhow. But hummingbirds have a great name because they hum. They make that noise, and so it actually does kind of do it justice, if you will. So these are just pretty pictures of hummingbirds I'm taking here. So the origins of the species. So no fossil record found in the New World. Uh-oh, what did I just tell you? That they're only found here. So no fossilized records here, but bone fragments in South America about 10,000 years ago, and a pair of 30-million-year-old fossils from southern Germany. 30 million years. Who remembers back 30 million years? Anybody? There we go. Yes, 30-million-year-old man in the back. And and found in Germany, which is interesting. But you got to remember, at one point the land masses were all together, and then they drifted apart. So therefore, you can see how that would have happened. Then the hummingbirds that were in that area died out, and the hummingbirds in the New World kind of remained. So the ancestors were insect-eating tropical birds, and you can just imagine this happening. You know, they're eating insects, and insects are attracted to flowers, so all of a sudden one day one of them goes, hey, there's something sweet in here, you know, and they discover nectar, and from there it's all downhill, you know, into the sugar-eating world of hummingbirds. So basically over those you know, millions of years, that's something we need to understand. And let me just kind of diverge from our talk a little bit to mention that the birds that we have today, our modern birds, the birds that we're, you know, that you guys feed in your yards and all that stuff, are birds that have been anywhere from 1 to upwards of 9 million years old. So they've been around for a long, long time. I think we lose track of that when we are talking about our birds and our bird feeding habits and things like that. Some of the oldest known birds that we know are the sandhill cranes. We have fossilized evidence going back 9 million years. So these birds have been around a long, long, long time. And it's something we need to keep in mind when we're interacting with them and when we think that we're influencing their behaviors and things like that. They're not so easily changed, is what I'm trying to say. So, but at that time when hummingbirds first started discovering the nectar in flowers, and that's another thing you need to understand. You see, as a biologist, I start going a little, you need to know this stuff, because flowers are relatively new, okay? 60 million years ago, the majority of plants on the earth were not flower-bearing plants. They were spore-bearing plants, like ferns, okay? Then after the demise of the dinosaurs, we saw a change in the types of plants, and we came about with flowering plants. These flowering plants are basically new, and so then when the hummingbirds started feeding on them, then you saw this kind of arms race of the tubular. This is called the corolla, the back part of the flower. The tube on that flower getting longer and longer in response to hummingbirds feeding more and more on them. So you had this kind of an interesting thing where then the hummingbird's bill got longer and longer to match up to those flowers, and then flowers getting their corolla longer, and you got this arms race going on between the two of them. And you've got some really fun, interesting things going on there. Enough divergence on that. But so the smallest bird in the world is a type of hummingbird. This is our smallest one here in North America, but the bee hummingbird in Cuba, only 2 inches long, 1.8 grams or 6/100ths of an ounce. And then the smallest one here in North America is the calliope hummingbird. The calliopes are the smallest in the U.S. at 2.5 grams or 1/10 of an ounce. Compare that to the ruby throat, which you're probably more familiar with if you're living in the eastern half of the United States. Sure, couldn't show up on time, huh? So ruby throat's 2.7 to 3 grams, so quite a bit bigger, about the weight of 1 U.S. penny. I happen to have a penny here. I mean, that's just ridiculous. That's how much it weighs. The same amount as that little thing. And this gives you an idea of the size of them. So that's a U.S. quarter. That is a single primary feather off a bald eagle, and that is a hummingbird, a full hummingbird. So look at the size. I mean, the shaft of that bald eagle feather is bigger than that entire bird. So, and here's another good one. Here's a bald eagle skull, and that's an entire skeleton of a ruby-throated hummingbird, which can almost fit in the eye socket of of this bird. You know, that's remarkable, truly. So, although they're small, they really don't have, they have some modified body parts, but not all of them. So their weight, of course, is very small. They have tiny feet. Their wing bones don't bend at the wrist. So most birds, what they do, when they come to a rest, they will fold their wings up on their back. Hummingbirds, their wrists are fused, and so they're like having boards for it. So when they put their wings back, they're just going straight back like this. So there's no moving. And then they have a real big flat sternum, which is, this bone here. Ours is flat this way, theirs is flat this way, and I'll show you a picture in just a second. And this sternum is what's used to hold the flight muscles, because these birds are flapping at 70 to 80 beats per second. Not per minute, per second, and they need a lot of muscle to move those wings. So of course they lack teeth, all birds lack teeth, and they have hollow bones, which allows them to be very lightweight. So here is that sternum, this is that keel. Here it is, I mean, the size of this thing. Now the reason why, that's a flat surface on two sides. The reason why you would have a flat surface like that is for muscle attachment. Muscles have to be attached to be able to power those wings. So it's very, very important. And that shows, here I'll also show you the amount of muscle that you need to be able to power those wings too. But first we'll talk about the lifespan. So the smaller the bird, the shorter the lifespan. Maybe you've heard me give this talk before where I talk about you can generalize the age or how long a bird will live by their size. So if you took all of our birds and lined them up by size order, starting with the smallest birds, the hummingbirds, and started, going up through the sparrows or the warblers to the sparrows to the, jays to crows to hawks to, eagles, and you get a good idea of how long they live. The smaller they are, the shorter the lifespan. The bigger they are, the longer the lifespan. So if we have hummingbirds on this end, what would be the biggest bird that we have in North America on this end? Anybody know? Condor. California condor, right. So these guys here living about, the hummingbirds on average 3 to 5 years. And you got this, as they get bigger, they live a little bit longer. And then you work your way all the way up to the condor. How long does the condor live? Anybody? A lot longer than a hummingbird. So 50, 60, 70, we believe could be possibly up to 80 years that the condors live. In fact, a lot of the researchers who are working on the reintroduction of the condor won't even live long enough to find out how long the condors actually live for. So that's kind of interesting. And then everything else falls in between there. It's a general rule. It's not exact, but it's a general rule that works fairly well. Broad-billed hummingbirds, the oldest living record was 12 years on that. The oldest ruby throat, 9 years. Go ahead.
Kind of off topic a little bit, but parrots, it's like they're kind of a mid-sized bird, but they famously live a really long time.
Yes.
So what happened there?
They're fairly big birds, though.
Are they?
Yeah, they really are. I mean, they're bigger than crows and things like that. And they also live. You got to live with look at the environment in which they live in too. Okay. So yeah, because parrots in captivity go 50, 60 years. Yeah. So they have a fast life. So survival the first year, about 50%. So all hummingbirds can only lay 2 eggs. That's their nest, that's their clutch. And about 50% of that will survive. So only 1 out of the 2. Go ahead.
Do you have a picture of the nest? Because I tried to
Yes.
look for it in my, I tried to look for it in my yard.
Yeah.
And it must be itty bitty.
Oh, they're hard to find. Yeah, where are you living at?
Virginia Beach, Virginia.
Yeah, see, us on the eastern half of the country, we find it's very hard to find hummingbird nests. You live in this America Southwest, where there aren't these things called leaves. You can find nests a lot easier, truly. So, maximum number of chicks is 2. And the adults need to live at least 2 breeding seasons to replace themselves. So yesterday we talked about this very briefly in the question and answer period. I was talking about the hummingbirds, how their populations really are on a knife's edge. They're very, very precarious in that they need so many years in which to replace themselves. So again, if you got 2 adults and they have 2 eggs, those eggs have a 50% mortality rate, so only 1 of them survives. You've only replaced 1 adult. So then you need a second breeding season to replace the second adult. So then you need a third breeding season to add to the population. Well, if you're only living 3 to 5 years or so on average, if you don't make it your full life expectancy, you're not adding to the population at all. So this is really a species that is it's really tough. So. And it's an important concept to kind of have in that life expectancy and replacing itself. Go ahead. Oh, wait a minute. You came in late. No questions for you. Go ahead.
Are they able to have babies in their first year, or is it after the first year?
So they're hatched in the spring, and then a female would be able to have the next spring. So if she's hatched this year, at 1 year of age, she would be able to reproduce. Yes. Yeah, they really got to get going on it. You know, it's very, very important. So about 50% of all hatchlings survive. Now, when I say that, and I'm oversimplifying it and saying that, well, of this nest, only one of the two will survive. That's simply not true. Typically what happens is that either two of them survive or none of them survive, which still gives you around 50% average. So, so you got to take that average with a grain of salt in that it's not like it's guaranteed, you know, it's not like you got a bald eagle nest and there's 4 of them in there, you know, and they got the different sizes and the youngest one dies. It's not like that at all. So early demise of the hummingbirds, of course. Late freezes, early frosts are really tough on these birds. Hail damage. I had 6 hummingbirds regularly at my house a number of years ago, and they were just, you know, all around all the time. We had one of those horrible hailstorms in May, and by the time the storm was done, I had 1 hummingbird, and I've actually never recovered from that since then. I've only had 1 hummingbird since then. So it happens, you know, the hail. I mean, you think about it, this would be hail like the size of an automobile coming out of the sky at you. You don't survive those types of things. Predators of these guys. So who eats hummingbirds?
Praying mantis.
Yes, yeah. And migration is so tough on these birds. Think about it. You're this big, you weigh as much as a U.S. penny, and you got to fly from Missouri down to Mexico or Central America.
Do they do
You know,
that? What is the,
migration.
what, I understand that they do migrate and all that. but
Why do they migrate?
No, yeah, I guess, but can they stay local even though it's
No.
cold?
There's no food. Yeah.
Well, I keep my hummingbird feeders out year round. I haven't noticed that they,
Yeah. No.
I was hoping.
Nah. So I have a whole talk on migration. I have a whole book on migration. That's more importantly. You should get the book. And what's because you got to wonder about you're in the you're in the tropics. It's warm. It's beautiful. There's food everywhere. Why the hell would you leave? You know, to go to, like, I live in Minnesota. Why would you go all the way to Minnesota? and that's really kind of a mystery. We have some guesses at it, but we really don't know. And you know, some of the guesses are it's for habitat, reduced amount of competition, unexploited food sources, so on and so forth. But that's a whole different topic. We didn't like that. So predators for them. Praying mantis, as you can see. See the praying mantis and see the hummer? Like that. When I was taking this picture in Arizona, the gal who had the, she kind of has a little hummingbird sanctuary, if you will, and she came over to me. I was sat there for the longest time waiting for an interaction like this to get that picture, and she came over and she says, you've been standing here a long time, what is going on? And I said, oh, there's a praying mantis there, and he's trying to catch hummingbirds, and I was trying to, you know, get some good pictures of it like that. And she says, tell me when you're done. And so when I was done, she just walked over and grabbed that praying mantis, threw it on the ground, just went. And I was like, remind me not to piss you off. You know? So bullfrogs are another one that takes hummingbirds. Hawks, and of course, roadrunners. Hummingbird feeders, they crouch down and then they just jump up in the air, snatch a hummingbird right out of midair, hit the ground, and off they go. So, spiders, yeah, anything, cats, all of it. There's lots of them, yeah. So, hummers from coast to coast. So they range from Alaska in the northwest to Labrador in the northeast, all the way down to Terra del Fuego, the southern tip of South America. So, 16 species regularly found here in the U.S. About 2 to 4 more species show up now and then. And then we got 6% of all the hummers in the world are here in the U.S. Only 6%. It's not much. So we have, of course, only the ruby throat in the eastern half of the United States, and then we have about 15 species in the western half of the United States. So, and most have a limited range to them, like the violet crowns and things like that, or they're just in these areas where, in the mountains of, you know, like southeastern Arizona and such like that. But they occur in a wide variety of habitats, mountains, the coasts, the deserts, the forest. They're all over the place like that. So, all right, regional variations. We don't see a lot of regional variations. You know what I'm talking about regional variations? Like fox sparrows, for example, look very different all across the United States. Very, very different looking from the east to the west and things like that. With the hummingbirds, they don't. They all, so I'm talking within a species. So the ruby throats look the same throughout the whole entire range, like that. Differences in the sexes, gosh, I hope I don't have to explain this to you folks. You're old enough by now to figure things out, but typically speaking, females are not ornamented and the males are ornamented. Again, remember in the bird world, it's the boys that are dressed up, not the girls. And so, and then they have amazing feathers. And these feathers that are kind of bright green in color like that. They're specialized feathers that reflect back light, the green spectrum of light back to our eyes. So what's happening here is, in this particular case, I'm using my flashes on my camera, and the light is going into the feathers. The feather is absorbing most of the wavelengths of light, and then reflecting back to our eyes green, that wavelength of light, just the green, and we see green. Those feathers are not green. It's bending of light. It's trickery, is what it is. So, and that's why some of these look different green than others, because they're reflecting light at different angles. So the barbules within the cells within the barbules are the ones that absorb in the wavelengths of light and reflect back to our eyes, much like a prism works like that. So, and you can see a better shot of it here with that green is well lit up here. If I didn't use a flash to photograph these birds here, the bird would look gray. All right, if you ever notice that yourself, on a gray day, the birds always look gray, and on a bright sunny day, they look vibrant colored. And that's because it's taking in the sunlight, reflecting it back to our eyes in the way that we can see it. And you know that's the same thing with bluebirds too, right, and blue jays. So blue and green and red, not red, the ruby red of the gorget on the hummingbird do that, but not like red of a cardinal or a tanager or anything like that. So these are the gorget feathers. These are the ones under the throat. And you can see when they turn away from you, they look dark, but when they turn towards you, they lighten up. So big differences there. Same thing with the throat on the ruby-throated hummingbird too. The magnificent hummingbird, which they've renamed now, is different from other hovers. They are covered their entire body with different reflective coloring to it. And that's why it's been named that. So, there are pigments involved with some of these birds. So the blacks are in the wings and in the face are pigments. And then the white parts are here are no pigments and no reflective cells. So a feather without any kind of coloring to it is white. And then you've got, you know, those anomalies like the leucistic birds. This is a leucistic hummingbird. You see that it's not albino. Albino would be all white with a pink eye, pink bill and things. Because it has a dark tail, dark bill and things like that, this is called leucistic. You can almost call it like partial albino, if you will. There's another good example of it there. All right, more pretty pictures. So they look the same year round, unlike, say, goldfinches, you know, and other birds that change color with the season. So, and they molt their body and their wing feathers only once per year. A lot of birds molt twice a year. Hummingbirds only molt once a year. So I find molting fascinating, but most people fall asleep when I start talking about it. So anyhow, yeah, so the wing and tail feathers are replaced annually, and you can see that in this picture. You see that there? There's a space missing right there, and this is the feather growing in to replace it. Now, when birds molt, they molt symmetrically across their body. So when they molt number 6 of their primary over here, they're molting number 6 of their primary over here. And they do it one at a time. That's why you don't notice it. When we do notice it is when? What? Cardinals, when they molt their head feathers, and then you get people calling you saying, oh my God, there's something wrong with my cardinals. They, you know, they have a... No, they're just molting their feathers. Go ahead.
Or do they just molt anytime? I mean,
No.
Typically they'll molt before they breed, but so do they molt?
They molt
down?
usually on their way down.
Okay, so on the way out of here.
Yeah. So, and feathers are replaced in an order across, and so they go across their body with like a wave. So there's something called feather tracks. These feather tracks go across their body, and they'll molt like an entire feather track, and those will come out, and then the new ones will start growing in before the next track falls out and the next one grows in. And it goes like a wave across their body, and they slowly replace their feathers as they go across their whole body. So feathers are so important to these birds, they can't do without them. So they have to do it in a kind of orderly fashion. So they have 10 tail feathers. However, this one here, I took this picture specifically like this to show that this one does not have any tail feathers at all. Those are wing feathers coming down. And this bird was perfectly able to fly too. There's something called a fright molt, where if they're grabbed like by the tail, they're so frightened, is how it's explained, that they'll drop all those feathers in the tail. And that's probably what happened with this one here, but he could fly just fine with no tail feathers at all. So, all right, so grows in pairs on opposite sides. We talked about all that stuff. So they're definitely masters of flight. Ruby throats flap about 80 times per second and up to 200 times per second in courtship flight. Okay, do it with me. We're gonna flap. See how many times we can flap in 1 second. Who's got a watch? Ready? And go. Jeez.
You didn't see that?
Yeah, that was 200 times per second. That's how fast I am.
But they really aren't flapping.
So their flapping they are flapping. So a normal bird would be like flapping, okay?
Right.
Up and down. Hummingbirds are doing a figure 8. They're going this direction, like that. And that way they're getting a downward push with the downward part of their wing. And then when they come back, they're getting a backwards push with the top part of their wing. So they're doing a figure 8. Remember I said that their wrists don't bend? They have like 2x4s for wings. And so they're doing this figure 8 like this. And that's also what causes the humming effect. They're moving so much air. That movement of air is what causes the sound. And then we hear that sound because of the movement of air. So does that
Yes.
explain it? Yeah. So
Did they not click too? When I hear them around my hummingbird feeders, I can hear like,
that's vocal. So they are not songbirds. They don't sing. They have very rudimentary calls. We're going to talk about calls shortly here. But anyhow, do think something 80 times per second. You know what I mean? This is truly remarkable stuff. So they fly 20 to 30 miles per hour during normal flight and up to 40 to 60 miles per hour during migration. So, and then that pectoral muscle makes up 25% of their body. Do you remember that picture I showed you, the keel, that big bone that sticks out there? The muscles that attach to that represent 25% of its entire body weight. That says a lot. That says a lot there's a lot of resources being put into that. And so that's a big deal. So, and then of course they can fly up, down, backwards. They can do all sorts of things like that. So,
And that wing, you're talking about their wings doing a figure 8.
Yes.
That's what allows them to do that. is because
exactly.
They've got it all.
Right. Because they don't have this. They don't have that loss of when you come up. Right. You're not gaining altitude when you come up. In a normal bird flight, it's when you're pushing down, then you gain altitude. You come up and you're actually going down in altitude. And that explains why a lot of birds have that kind of undulated flight, too. So they're able to do this, and that's also what allows them to hover, because they're getting up power stroke down, power stroke down, power stroke down, power stroke down, back and forth like that. So they have an extraordinary heart. So compared to other birds, hummers have the largest heart in proportion to their body. 2.5% of their body weight is their heart. So, okay, you got that 25% of your body weight is muscle. That muscle has to be perfused with rich oxygen blood. And how do you do it? You do it with a really big, strong heart. And that's what this is here. 2.5% of its body weight is just its heart. So far, what do we got out of this animal? We got wings that are really stiff, a gigantic breast muscle, and a huge heart to pump the whole thing. That's it. That's pretty much the whole animal, you know? So it's pretty amazing. 500 beats per minute during resting. Holy crap, right? Which is about 8 heartbeats per second. No wonder they don't live very long, you know? They just simply wear out. 250 breaths per minute, so it's everything they do is fast. They have excellent eyesight, small eyes, but excellent eyesight. That's how they find their food. They find food by eyesight. They find your feeder by eyesight. So, and nearly twice as good as people there. Color vision, of course, and they also see in ultraviolet light. Now, do you know about the nectar guides on flowers? So nectar guides on flowers are, let's just take an Asiatic lily just for example, because it's a big flower like that. If you put that flower under UV light, you see dark lines all pointing towards the center of that flower. And it's believed that this is a visual cue for UV seeing animals like birds to see where the nectar's at. It's guiding them in there. You got to try to remember this. Again, this is my biology kind of kicking in here. What are flowers for? Reproduction. And they're there to attract in insects and birds. They're not there for you and me. They're not there for us to pick, loves me not, to give for, you know, oh, I'm sorry, honey, or whatever. Which, by the way, I do owe you some. That's all right. No. And,
Think about it.
you know, yeah. Now that you brought that up. Anyhow, so those flowers are there specifically for reproduction. Reproduction has to take place by moving pollen from point A to point B. And how do you do that? You do it on the wind, and then you don't need a bright, showy flower, or you do it by insects or birds. And you do that by attracting them in, and that's what they do. So then the flower is offering a nectar gift to say, come to my flower, I'll reward you with this, but you're going to pick up my pollen and you're going to bring it to the next flower. Who's in charge here, the plants or the animals? Because I'm thinking it's the plants. You know, the plants are the ones that are really kind of driving this force here. So these nectar guides are found on these flowers, and they help to guide in the hummingbird right to those locations. They have a very unique bill. Everybody thinks of it as being really stiff and hard, but look, they're able to open the tip of it and keep the base of it closed. Very unusual. So it's a marvelous combination of form and function. So, and then the newest tongue discovery on these guys is that when you see this, you can see this is it kind of closed. This is the tip of the tongue, but then when it goes in, it opens up kind of the tip of it there. And here, you can see it better here on the sides. It opens up channels on both sides of the tongue. So they're like little grooves on both sides of the tongue. And that where this is closed up. And then it's able to, here's a little video for you. Hopefully it's working. So you can see it as it's going to go in. So you can watch it here where the clear tube is. You see it goes in, and it's, you know, lick, 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 lick. And it's going in. This is highly slowed down, of course, and you can see how quickly it's going in there. So in super slow motion, that's the wing getting away. See how it spreads apart? One more time. Where it comes out. Whoops. We should probably, maybe I can play that again. Here, it goes in. See how it opens up? It's filling up those side channels, and then it's drawing it back into its mouth. How does a cat drink water, or your dog drink water? The tongue goes down in there. It actually curls underneath. So if they're going this way, it actually goes underneath. It gets water here in that little thing and picks it up back into its mouth and throws it back into its mouth. These guys are doing the same thing. They're sticking their tongue into there. Those side grooves are filling up. They're pulling it back in their mouth, stripping out the nectar, swallowing it, and then tongue comes back out again. So it's not a straw, I guess, is the bottom line. They're not sitting there sipping nectar. They're lapping nectar. So, and of course, what comes of all that nectar is, that's their poop. It's kind of like clear water. So they consume 5 to 6 grams, or about 1/5 of an ounce of nectar each day, and their digestive system processes it very quickly. The sugars are extracted, and the water is excreted. Water's heavy. You don't want to be carrying it around, you know, because you're a flying bird. You got to fly. And so what happens is they excrete it out very, very quickly. It passes through their digestive system in an instant, you know, basically. So, energy in nectar, so the average nectar is about 25 to 30% sucrose, which is just a simple sugar. And to replace that, we do 4 parts of water, 1 part of sugar, and then hummingbirds feed 7 to 9 times per minute in a single visit up to 4 to 6 seconds. So here's a good example of this whole thing. So here's a hummingbird with pollen up on its nose, because every time it goes into here, this is where the get this right. This is where the stigma is, and it has the pollen on it. So as the bird comes in to feed, the corolla's back here. As it comes in to feed here, this touches the top of the bird, deposits pollen there. Look, pollen is falling off as it's backing up. And this is all happening in a split second, of course. And then it goes on to the next flower where it's carrying that pollen and cross-pollinates the flowers. And this is what the flowers need. So again, who's in charge here? So they're just going for a sip of nectar and having to do the dirty work, you know. So yeah, that's all the pollen on there. So cross-pollination is very, very important. So, all right. And then, another source of food for these birds are like sapsuckers who drill these taps in trees, and then out from the taps come the sap of the tree, and then the hummingbirds come along. So there you can see what they're doing. And then hummingbirds come along and they feed on that sap that's coming out of the tree. Now at my nature center, we tap our trees and we make maple syrup every year, and it's 40 to 1. So it takes 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. So the sugar content is really low in here, but apparently it's good enough for these birds to be able to come and feed off of it. So food tasting, so the average human has about somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 taste buds on our tongues, and hummingbirds have about 10. Now, recently I've been looking at rabbits, and rabbits have upwards of 20,000 taste buds on their tongues. So they're able to taste and differentiate between different plants. And then they're very kind of choosy when it comes to the different plants that they try to eat. So this is very interesting and new type of information. And I mentioned this yesterday, I think, when I was in college, we set up 10 identical feeders and put in 10 different concentrations of sugar, set them up in different various orders, and then monitored which one got drained first. And consistently, they always found the highest concentration of sugar and concentrated on that one. They would literally go down the line testing all of them and go, up, this one right here. And then they would concentrate their efforts on that one because that had the highest sugar content. So which is interesting, and because I do this myself in the fall right before they're starting to migrate. I'll bump up my sugar content when I'm feeding my hummingbirds, and I do it just because I really like hummingbirds, and they really go for it. They really like it, you know. And it's not like you're going to give them tooth decay or heart disease or, you know, I mean, somebody sent me a flaming email here recently about, you know, recommending some food and how it's not heart healthy for these birds. I'm like, really? They live 3 to 5 years. Every day's survival for them. Literally, it's survival for them. They have to get up every morning and go out and survive. You think they're worried? I mean, come on, people, get over it, you know? It's like, at any rate. So, the ability, having these few taste buds kind of suggests that they don't have really great a sense of smell, too. So, is it something I said? No. Oh, yeah, I know. I'm just having fun. So, yeah. So, hummingbirds take a shower when it's raining out. They love, and by the way, when they're doing this, you can oftentimes hear them singing in the rain. No, I'm kidding. Singing in the rain? Come on, you're old enough for this. You know, I say that to young group, and they look at me like, what? At any rate. So after a rainstorm, they oftentimes will kind of bathe on the leaves. They'll get on the leaves, and they'll use those raindrops that are on the leaves to get themselves wet with, and then they preen and they clean, and they try to get themselves better. So average hummingbird has less than 1,000 feathers, including about 200 contour feathers, and they have to really kind of keep track of those things and take good care of them, if you will. So, all right. So then it's not uncommon for birds to sunbathe. So they lay on the ground, they spread their wing feathers, they lift up their back feathers, and they lay in the sun. Now, forever, they've always said that this is probably to rid themselves of parasites, such as mites or ticks and things like that. And it's like, really? They say, well, it's being exposed to the sunlight. It's like, they're being exposed to the sunlight every day, all day. That's all there is to it. So it doesn't make any sense to me. I honestly, in just my humble opinion, I think it feels good. And that's why they're doing it. I don't think they're doing it to get rid of parasites. So they'll do this for like 30 seconds to a minute, right? They'll just lay there and they'll kind of go, and they'll open their beak and like that. I can't imagine a tick or, a mite going, oh, ish, sunlight, we have to leave now. 30 seconds of sunlight, it's like, it doesn't make any sense to me, but there's a lot of things written in books that are not true, by the way. So, call notes. So this is getting to your things. They are not songbirds. They have a very rudimentary vocal system, and they do a little chittering and chattering, and sometimes some high-pitched squeaks, but that's about it. So they make sounds with their voice box called the syrinx, and the syrinx then is what does it. They make the most noise with their wings, so wing singing here. So broad-tailed hummingbirds, the males have a specialized primary feather. That's this one right here. See how thick that is? How unusual that is. And it vibrates at a high rate, and it sounds like a little bell tinkling. So if you're out in the Rocky Mountains and you hear these guys go by, the males go by, you hear this like as they go by. And that is the male showing off, typical guy. So it's really fun, though. So they have the ruby throats have an amazing courtship display. So one thing you need to understand about courtship with hummingbirds is females have their own territory, males have their own territory. They do not form a pair bond. They are separate from each other. And the female will leave her territory to go to the male's territory to solicit a copulation, and then goes back and takes care of everything on her own. She builds her own nest, lays her own eggs, does all her incubating, has nothing more to the guy. He's at the bar, basically, the whole time. But the males will court the females with these courtship flights, and it's in a U shape that they do. So the males perform these spectacular displays. The female's perched, and the male will fly in front of the female, back and forth like this. You might have seen this in your garden. And it's the male, he flies by, and if she's here, as he goes past, he flashes his gorget. He flies by and goes, what do you think? Is it working?
Not working.
Damn it. And he'll do these U-shaped flights up to 30 feet in the air, and they're like big, exaggerated, 30 feet in the air type of things. And then when she's finally accepted him, that's when he kind of gets and does those quick ones right in front of her, and that's when he's like whispering the sweet nothings, and no? So, damn it all. So calliope hummingbirds, the males fly as high as 60 to 90 feet in a U-shaped dive. Costa's hummingbirds fly in ovals, black chins in U-shape, Anna's in a big J shape, 120 feet in the air, and come back down and go back up again. So it's very elaborate. It's classic what a guy will do for any rate. So they have huge attitudes. They are not a congenial bird. They fight all the time. They need to protect their food sources and their territories. And trespassers are chased off. And they're just really kind of aggressive little birds. They truly are. And they hold territories. They're small territories, a quarter to a half acre, and that's it. So. And then, of course, they are true neotropical migrants, meaning that they fly all the way down to the tropics for the winter time. So migration is still a great mystery to science, because that young hummingbird that was hatched this spring will migrate all the way down to Central America on its own. How does it know how to go? How does it know which way to go, which direction to go in, and and how does it know when it got there to the right place? So migration allows for expansion of ranges, exploiting new food sources, and for less competition for mates, so on and so forth. And no, damn it, they don't migrate in the backs of geese. Oh my God, if I hear this one more time.
My husband swears by it.
See? People say it all the time, and geese don't even migrate. They just kind of move around, and hummingbirds go all the way down to the tropics. I mean, no goose has ever, anyway, don't get me started here, so. And that has come from hunters, by the way, that whole thing. Yeah, the hunters come up with the weirdest.
They don't understand that this little bird can migrate.
Yeah, right, exactly. So there has to be a different reason. Believe it or not, in the 1800s, we used to think that birds at night used to dive down to the bottoms of ponds and overnight in the bottom of a pond. Can you imagine that? All of a sudden, they're aquatic birds, who don't need to breathe, apparently, so. At any rate, so what causes these birds to migrate is the photoperiod. This is an important concept to get across. It's not the shortage of food. It's not, whatever. It is the photoperiod. The photoperiod is the amount of sunlight from sunrise to sunset. And that photoperiod is consistent from year to year. Weather is not consistent. Food sources are not consistent. What's consistent is the photoperiod. So the photoperiod is actually absorbed by birds directly through their skull. You and I react to the photoperiod, right? Except mammals, we react to it by seeing the amount of daylight coming through our eyes. Birds don't register it through their eyes, they register it through their head, right into the hippocampus of the brain, and that kicks off the endocrine system to pump out hormones that tell the bird to migrate. So taking down your hummingbird feeder to force them to migrate is the most ridiculous thing you can possibly come up with. It's just absolutely... Oh yeah, exactly. So it's just simply not how it works. They're going to migrate whether you want them to or not. And the analogy I always like to try to put out there is that, you know, when your child was little, you didn't teach them to walk. They got up and walked on their own, whether you wanted them to or not. It's not like you had an option. Oh, I'll have a child that doesn't walk. You know, it doesn't happen that way. It's going to walk. These birds are going to migrate, period, not. Now, if you have a bird who doesn't migrate, there's something wrong with its whole endocrine system. There's something clearly genetically wrong with it. And then what do we do as people? We jump right in, we save the bird, you know, like that, and then I do this back home. A friend of mine is a chief pilot for a big corporation, private corporation. They have jets that are flying everywhere, and I always arrange for these flights to fly these hummingbirds like down to, you know, Florida or Texas or something. It's such a waste of time because this bird is genetically messed up and should die because that's how nature works. But yet, what do? We mess it all up and we interfere with everything, and you know.
Well, bluebirds and robins that are staying longer and longer, almost year-round now.
There you go. Yeah. Well, they're doing, and they're surviving. A hummingbird won't survive, you know, in those situations like that. But when you have those individual hummingbirds, you guys have all seen these stories, haven't you? Somebody's got a hummingbird, oh my gosh, and they have heat lamps out there, and they got heated nectar feeder, and
What's wrong with that?
yeah, exactly. There's my point. So, it's clearly a defect in their endocrine system, and that bird needs to die. So it's not passing on bad genes anyhow. So don't take down your feeders. You want them to feed, because I get that question. You must get this question all the time too. You know, having to take down your feeders to force the birds to migrate. It's just absolutely ridiculous. That is another example, by the way, of projecting human thoughts and emotions onto the animals. You know, because, yeah, your cousin who, if you fed them enough, they're not going to leave, right? Or, you know, that brother or, you know, whoever, your uncle, whoever who doesn't want to leave because you're feeding them, is not how it works in the natural world.
I
So,
always say, you know, you're the gas station. They're moving
yeah,
through,
they're moving through.
You're providing, you know, fuel,
Yeah.
and they're moving,
And you need to provide it through to the end, because there's birds north of
stay
you.
unless they're sick.
Yeah, and there's birds north of you who are passing through also. So you got to be able to, anyhow, moving on. So they do an impressive migration, 18 to 22 hours of nonstop flight across the Gulf of Mexico to get down there. They don't rest, they don't eat. And if you don't think that that's amazing, I want you to get in your car and drive for 18 to 22 hours straight. And then get back to me and let me know how that went, you know. So hummingbirds, they need enough fat reserves to reach their destination, but they can't have too much fat or they can't fly. Or if they have not enough fat, then they run out of gas and drop into the ocean when they're migrating across the Gulf of Mexico. So ruby throats cross the Gulf of Mexico to the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. This is about a 500-mile journey. So it's really, truly remarkable. So not all hummingbirds do long migrations, of course. Rufus flies up to 3,000 miles across the mountains. Anna's hummingbird in Southern California, they never leave. So there's all sorts of different ways. And it's always fun to watch those spring migration. If you're on the eastern half of the United States, to watch those, you know, as they're moving up. You can see the dots down here, and then as the map continues every day, you can see the dots moving further and further north as reports of these birds coming in. It's quite interesting too. So arriving on the breeding grounds, of course, adult males arrive first, adult females are second. The males are fast to return on the migration in the spring because they want to establish a territory. Fall migration is much more lackadaisical. It's like, whatever, I'll get there when I get there, you know. But spring, it's like a sprint to get there. So putting up feeders and planting flowers convince a male to stay in your area to have a territory there. And who hasn't had this? You hadn't put up your feeders, and what happens? All of a sudden one day, hummingbirds out there flying around looking where your feeder was last year. And they're looking, and then next thing you know, you got that, hey! The hummingbird's tapping at the window going, bring out the feeder, So if you ever want evidence that the hummingbirds return to your yard, there it is, because they come back looking for that food source. That food source is so important to them that they will actually come back looking for it. They remembered where it was at, and they come back looking for it. So, and of course, they establish these territories, and they establish different territories. And then here's the nest building process. So they start out very small, and they bring in these fine plant material, and then they use spider webs they gather up these spider webs in which to kind of stick it all together with. And then finally at the end, they use lichens to ornament the outside of it to help it blend in, and you've got these nests. So here's a nest, that's a dime that fits inside there. It's quite large.
Can you put out material to encourage the nesting?
Yeah, yes, you can do that. There's a lot of controversy around that because you can put out all sorts of materials for like your oriole nesters, a lot of things like that. But there's a lot of people who don't like that idea.
Just hummingbirds.
Well, they're going to go for they're going to go for anything. Mostly it's these soft plant, like.
Yarn or any of the
Well, if you look at it here, it's like cattail down, cottonwood tufts. Those types of fluffy things is what they're using right there. Because as you know, again, I'm preaching to the choir here, so you guys know this stuff. So the nest is built to fit one adult. But then they lay 2 eggs, which then grow to adult size. So that nest has to expand from fitting 1 adult to fitting 2 adults, basically, adult size. And they do that because of all the spider webs that are used to help hold it together. Spider webs gives it that flexibility to it. So outside my office window at the Nature Center, I've got a little thing hanging out my window, and I always get a spider that builds a spider nest or spider web in there. And in the springtime, I watch my hummingbirds. They come up and they will pull that spider webs off, and then they fly off with it. I think I have some pictures where you can see the female's got spider webs stuck to her chest still. And because her bill's so long, she can't really get to preen them off, so they're kind of stuck there for a while. But so this is what the bottom line looks like. And she stuck each one of these pieces of lichen onto that nest to make it blend in. So this is what they look like when they hatch. See, that's what they almost get to nearly full size when they're still in the nest like that. And that nest really expands out and flattens out too. So you get an idea of how small the nest is there too. So 2 eggs always, a maximum of 2. And then the female starts incubating at the same time, producing synchronous hatching. I think we talked about synchronous and asynchronous hatching. And this is just a comparison. There's an ostrich, chicken, and hummingbird egg. So incubation, of course, 23 hours or more a day. She'll do this from anywhere from 11 to 14 days, depending on the species. And she does it all by herself. The male is not involved at all. So typical. And then the action of making this basically this tiny hole by a baby hummingbird is called pipping, and that pipping then breaks open and the bird hatches out. And the mother carries away the eggshells, and then the mother's feeding by regurgitating. Here's the mom. You can tell it's the mom because look at her. She's just beat up. She looks terrible like that. And here's the baby, feed me, feed me, feed me. And so she regurgitates back up a combination of insects and nectar. So what she does is she'll go out and feed. So I've spent many, many hours and days at hummingbird nests, and they come in about once or twice an hour, the female does, to feed the babies. And she'll go out, collect up insects, and then she'll drink nectar. She'll have that in basically like a little insect slurry in her crop, and then she'll come back and regurgitate that into the mouth of the babies. And you thought you had a tough childhood. So, I mean, you imagine that, your parents coming back and vomiting in your mouth. So by the end of summer, the females and the young are the only ones left at the feeders, and the males leave first, the females leave second, and then the juveniles leave last on their own. How do they know where to go? We don't know.
Will they continue to eat insects after the baby's fledged?
Oh yeah, they can't live on sugar alone.
What percentage is nectar and what percentage is?
Oh, they need all the amino acids, vitamins, everything from insects. Otherwise, you can't live on sugar alone. I've tried it. It doesn't work. So, the sugar gives them just instant energy, but they need all those proteins. And that's another thing I see too, is that, so I have this little, outside my window, the spider web all the time, and I see the hummingbirds come up and just plucking the insects that weren't eaten by the spider out of it in the morning. And they just come by and pick them out, or they snap them out of the midair. I see that behavior all the time. So, yeah, we're just giving them the sweets. So, just a month old, the young are on their own. Wow, 4 weeks old, and you're on your own. And so then they come back to their mother's territories. If they find their mother there, the mother usually kicks them out. If not, they'll take over their mother's territory. Pretty pictures. Here's the white-lying sphinx moth. This is, oftentimes people get this confused with, hummingbirds. And of course, attracting hummingbirds, I always love that picture there. This is my yard, so most people have their gardens in their backyard. I put my garden in my front yard. This is basically an elaborate scheme to not mow the lawn. And it works. So here you can see I got a white picket fence out front, and I just put in all these perennials. Yes, they are not native, but they bloom a lot. They look great, and I don't do anything to it. So I built this house 33 years ago, and I've never used fertilizers on it, no pesticides, no herbicides, nothing. It is a survival garden. Do you know what a survival garden is? You put in a bunch of plants, whatever survives, you go out and get more of those. So, so it's just a nice thing to have. And then, and this attracts in all the different things. Of course, I have my hummingbird feeders in there too. And then choosing feeders, of course, and you guys are the experts when it comes to all that stuff, but glass or plastic, and obviously no red dyes. And so 25% sucrose, which is basically simple white sugar. And I don't need to go over all this stuff with you guys. Lots of pictures. And now here's the hummingbird myths that we got to get rid of, and that they feed only on red flowers. Not true. Look at that. It's a yellow flower. So they consume only nectar. Not true. They can't live on sugar alone. Only drink homemade nectar with red dye. Not true, obviously. Suck up nectar using their bill like a straw. Not true. We just saw that. They're lapping it up with their tongues. And then feeders left up to stop hummingbirds from migrating. Oh my gosh. And migrating on the backs of geese one more time, okay? Not true. And constantly in flight and never landing. That's not true. They land all the time. That they can't walk. That's not true. They can walk. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about my favorite group of birds, the hummingbirds. Go ahead.
Well, you talked about how they would go to the sweeter and sweeter nectar. So
Yes, yeah.
4 to 1 is the normal amount, but you say you sweeten it.
Oh no, we would go really low concentrations, like 12 to 1. So super dilute.
So 4 to 1 is so it's recommended, but why wouldn't you do 3 to 1 if that's preferred for or do you do that just when you're getting ready to fly?
Oh no, I go above 4 to 1. I go up higher. Well, I guess, yeah, you'd be 3 to 1 or 2 to 1. More sugar, yes. I do that in the end of the season just because.
Just at the end of the season.
Yeah. So what you're trying to do is basically replicate natural flowers. Natural flowers, they've done great studies on this. Most flowers are lower than 25% sucrose. Some of the high-end flowers that produce the most sucrose are 25%. So we're basically just trying, that's why, anybody ever wondered why do we do 4 to 1? Well, it's because we're trying to replicate what they find in nature.
But more isn't always better, just more is better at the end of the season.
I don't know, I kind of, could be good, That's a personal choice,
All right.
It's not like you're going to create a bunch of highly dependent, junky hummingbirds that, I gotta need more, So, yes, sir.
What's your opinion of the humbug feeder?
I don't know the humbug feeder. What is it?
That's one that puts bananas in and you get the fire.
Oh, and it attracts all the bugs and then they eat the bugs? Seems like, I don't know.
Just don't put it by your back door.
Yeah, I don't know. You guys probably have more experience with that than I don't use one, so.
Okay.
Are they any good?
They're available. We have them here, so.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I don't, sounds like it.
I don't do as well as kind of Montana, and we don't really have a lot of fruit flies.
Ah,
So,
yeah.
it really, you gotta find a place where the fruit flies will be attractive.
That makes sense. If you're in
Too nasty.
if you're in an area that doesn't have high, fruit flies, I wouldn't have them in Minnesota, so maybe in southern states, perhaps. I don't know. So, go ahead.
Well,
back to the bill bending.
Yeah.
How do they do that? Is there a tendon?
So it's-
or a muscle there?
Yeah, so it's flexible because you know bills are made out of keratin, and the keratin is the same thing as like your fingernails and your hair is made out of. And how they do it, it's all muscle control. So, but isn't that fascinating? You can see it. You can actually see how the base of their bills open, and they.
And why are they doing it?
That's how they grab their insects.
Insects and stuff, they actually do with the bill.
And when they're going down into a flower, so if they had to open up, they can open just to the end to get their tongue out. So go ahead.
Have they ever been measured for their tongue lengths?
Yes.
A lot of people complain that if the feeder's too deep, they don't understand that they can still get.
Yes, and you want feeders that are deep because then the bees can't get to it because bee tongues are only about a quarter inch and you got to get beyond that. Otherwise the bees are taking all your nectar and
Told them like their bill is this long, their tongue is going to be this
much
long,
longer.
fine.
Most birds have tongues that wrap around their skulls. So it's, yeah.
Writing that about them not being able to get.
Yeah, yeah. See, there it is. So again, people are like comparing it to themselves.
Yeah.
And they-
I've had people pick out suet based on their own taste. Like, I don't like hot things. I'm like, what are you doing?
Are you eating it? Yeah, go ahead.
What about these, I call them a hummingbird moth that comes.
Yeah,
as
I
it
showed you a
lays.
picture. Yeah,
And, I mean, they come and they stay quite a while on
Yeah.
the flowers.
yeah.
Are they,
They're a moth species who goes through its whole life cycle through the summer, and that's why we see them mostly at the end of summer. And they are feeding, they have a proboscis, so they have a mouth that is like a straw. It's and they coil it up, and they uncoil it, and they put it in there, and they have a mouth part that does suck like a straw. Hummingbirds don't. So it's very different. Again, we're comparing insects to birds. It's like comparing birds to mammals. It's very, very different. You know, I mean, insects don't have bones, crying out loud, you know. Their bones are on the outside of their body.
Why is there only ruby-throated on the eastern side? Why?
Yeah, damn it, because I know. It's like, yeah,
Is there a reason why we don't?
it's called evolution. Yeah, it's called evolution, no doubt. It's the ruby throat that was able to pioneer and be able to take advantage of those open areas in which they kind of moved into. So do you know who's moving into the east now, though? Rufous hummingbirds. We're seeing more and more Rufous hummingbirds wintering along the Gulf Coast, so Alabama, Louisiana, and then and are moving up into the eastern states. So if we're going to have an additional hummingbird species in the eastern half of the United States, it's going to be the Rufous.
Do you think they're going to be able to compete against those bullies?
It'll be interesting to see. Rufous are tough. They are tough. Yeah, yeah,
So with the Rufus and the Allens,
yeah.
like they were saying it was the vocalization and that little notch in their
I know. Yeah, they're so hard. I usually use range to help differentiate between the two.
If I'm standing here and I see something, I'm calling it.
Yeah, exactly. They're tough. And, Rufus and Allens are nearly impossible to tell them apart. So like that. Go ahead, Howard.
A lot of nectar is still red that's being sold.
Yeah,
Typically,
yeah.
Is there a safer dye they're putting in it, or are they simply?
I don't know. You guys probably would know better than I would on that
Are
one.
they truly attracted to the red?
No, the red should be on the feeder. It should be on the feeder only.
It's a marketing thing.
It's
hard to
marketing.
Take a picture of clear liquid and make it look good in your feeder.
Exactly it. Yeah.
A lot of the red is made out of beetles now. Beetles and flowers is a natural color that's in a lot of food now. It's beetles and flowers.
Which is interesting because, a lot of birds derive their feather color from their diet. And so depending on what it is, it could actually help increase the vibrance of their feathers too. So I don't know. I make my own. I just use sugar and water, and so I'm super lazy. So I just mix it with warm water and just pour it in and put it out, and that's it. I don't
I
boil.
don't mind because I'm worried about
Yeah.
bacteria or whatever, for
So,
whatever reason.
you know,
Bacteria in your tap water, you're on your own.
yeah.
I'm on a well.
Yeah, which can be a real problem because I'm on a well too. The bacteria can be a real problem in those wells like that. But the one thing I do is
Different stuff.
I put out like 1 cup. That's it. Just put out 1 cup. So I mean, my feeder will hold like 4 cups or something. I put out 1 cup. That's it. I only mix up a little bit, put in a little bit, because by the time it's gone bad. By the time it's if you fill the whole damn thing up.
Feeders and about 150 hummingbirds.
So I'm coming over.
Burn through
I'm coming over, man.
feeder,
Where'd you say, Virginia?
3 days.
Yeah?
I have a second floor deck that goes all the way around, and I built poles that go off.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're about 20 feet off the ground. And after it rains, I take video, and it's just like mobs.
Fun.
Us Western people see videos like that, and how do you do that? I have one group that's.
Yeah. Pushes them rest away. Yeah.
Well, the only rubies I'm looking for are different.
Yeah. You won't. There are no others. You're only going to have ruby. That's it. You just got the one.
Evolution, my friend.
Yes. You guys got to stick around for 1,000 years. Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Did you say you have a book out on hummingbirds?
I do. A brand new book just came out. You need to come into the booth. Do you have your free book coupon in there? You got your free book coupon? Come by my booth and I'll give you a free hummingbird book.
He'll even sign it.
I'll even damage it for you by signing it.
Is that back in that corner?
Yes, way back corner. You want me to sign somebody else's name? Sure. Yeah, there you go. Great idea.
Nesting, are they high, low, shrub, tree?
Almost always on a downward leaning branch, and they stick the nest right on the branch. It's not in the crook of a tree or anything like that. It's on a downward hanging branch like this. Put on it. Anywhere from 6 to 20 feet.
Has the nectar next to you, she's got a video of one nesting on her,
Someplace where they build 2 of them, or they start to build 2 of them at one time? Or is that-
Females will start one, and if it doesn't work out, they'll start into another one.
Okay.
Yes. So they will take, a female will, it's a typical woman, they change their mind and then, oh no, that's not working, is it?
No, not working.
Yeah. So yeah, I photographed one who changed 3 times before she finally settled in on building one nest. She started 3 of them, and they were all within, a couple hundred feet of each other. So.
I saw a video one time